Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I'm your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Today, we are discussing the differences between a passenger and a crew safety briefing. Before we get started, could I ask you to just hit those like and subscribe buttons, and if you're out there in podcast land, hit that follow button so future episodes are automatically downloaded. These are completely free, and it really helps the channel grow and will help me continue to make more content in the future. All right, so this topic came to me because it dawned on me that we as instructors need to do a better job at teaching our students how to do proper safety briefings that are appropriate to the audience we are talking to. Every time I get in a plane with a student for either a mock check ride or any instructional flight with a new-to-me pilot, typically they will pick up the checklist and the first thing on it reads, Passenger Safety Briefing. From there, they will typically begin giving me instructions about how to use seatbelts and how to close the doors, etc. And once they finish, or sometimes I'll cut them off prematurely depending on time, but I will ask them if we have any passengers on the flight. And their typical response is, no. So why then are we doing a passenger safety brief, I ask. And this is typically met with a deer in the headlights look, and then I get into the very discussion I'm about to have here with you. The bottom line is there are very different things that passengers on a plane need to know and be able to do versus what another certificated pilot who is essentially acting as a crew member needs to know and be able to do. This would apply to any time you're simply flying with another pilot friend or practicing approaches with a safety pilot or taking a check ride with a pilot examiner. So we are going to break down the differences between these briefings, and hopefully this will help you teach and or utilize much more effective safety briefings going forward. All right, let's talk about the actual passenger safety briefing. Most of us were taught the acronym SAFETY for this purpose. The S stands for seatbelts. Just like in an airliner, all passengers need to be briefed on the proper use of seatbelts, including the times during the flight when they are required. Unlike airliners, most GA planes these days have some sort of shoulder harness, and more complex harnesses like the 5-point harnesses in the RV-12 could require some instruction to be properly fastened. So it's important that as PIC, we are ensuring seatbelts are properly fastened and remain fastened throughout all applicable phases of flight. Typically for a GA flight, this is going to be throughout the whole flight, as there really isn't the possibility of people getting up to use the bathroom or anything on your 172. But for more information on exactly what is required for seatbelt usage, you can review Part 91-107. All right, the A in safety is for air. We want our passengers to know what they can do on those hot summer days to get some air on their face, and also what they cannot do. For instance, we wouldn't necessarily want our passengers opening a window in flight, yet depending on the plane, that may be exactly what they need to do for a source of air conditioning. We also want them to know what they can do if they get cold and need some heat. Now, this is one mistake I see all too often with newer pilots especially, which is that they try to show passengers where the knob is that they can pull for cabin heat. This is well-intentioned, yet a really bad idea at the same time. We never want our passengers touching anything on the panel of our aircraft unless we explicitly tell them to do so. As I'm sure you're familiar, the knobs in all old Cessna or Piper aircraft can all look quite similar. And that, combined with the fact that labeling of said knobs can be hard to read at best, means that a well-intentioned passenger who gets cold doesn't want to bother you while you're trying to fly. So they may just try to remember, oh, which knob was it that you said to pull for heat? Oh, I'm pretty sure it's probably this big red one right in the middle of the panel, right? Red for heat. I think you see where I'm going with this, okay? We don't need our uneducated passengers touching anything on that panel, and especially not pulling any big red knobs while we're in the middle of flying. So the bottom line is, I make it clear to all passengers that they should not touch anything on the panel without my explicit instruction. And while there are typically easy options for them to get air on themselves for air conditioning purposes, if they get cold, just let me know, and I will turn the heat on for them. All right, F. F is for fire and fire extinguishers. So again, this comes down to things that are appropriate for our passengers to know and be expected to do, and things that are not appropriate. If there is a fire extinguisher on board the aircraft, it can be pointed out to the passengers, but should also include instructions on how to remove it from its mount and possibly how to dispense it if necessary. When it comes to the possibility of a fire on the ground, this is where things tend to get a bit unrealistic with many safety briefings I hear. Most pilots are good about briefing the fact that if a fire occurs on the ground, they should exit the aircraft and turn to a 45-degree angle to the back of the plane and never run towards the front of the plane. Okay? However, typically, this is followed up by the identification of fire extinguishers we have on the ground that are not in the plane. For instance, at the fuel station. The implication that a passenger should try to get a fire extinguisher from the fuel station and use it on an engine fire on the ground when, one, they have not been trained to do so, and two, would quite possibly require them to actually run somewhat towards the front of the aircraft is a horrible idea. Instead, I just advise my passengers as to how to exit the aircraft safely, tell them to go find someone to help, while possibly I might keep turning the starter on the engine to hopefully ingest the flames and prevent the fire from spreading. Chances are, however, that if I'm staying in the plane to address the fire, I would have them stay too, and when evacuation was necessary, we all would be evacuating. Okay, moving on to E. E is for exits. We need to make sure our passengers understand how to operate the exits, which exits are best for them to use, and what options there might be for emergency exits, such as kicking out windows, etc. We can also talk about how we will open the doors prior to landing in the case of an off-field forced landing. Okay, T. T is for traffic and talking. For traffic, we want our passengers to know that they are not merely along for the ride here. We need their help to look outside and point out any airplanes or other objects they see in the sky. It's good to instruct them on how to use the hands of a clock, like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, okay, to identify directions of potential traffic, as well as a designation of high, low, or same altitude as it relates to the horizon. Talking is in reference to the sterile cockpit. Remember that typically all communication during critical phases of flight, including taxi, takeoff, and landing, should only be related to safety of that flight. Idle chatter and small talk should be reserved for flight above 1,000 feet AGL. Now, your passengers are not going to know when we are above or below 1,000 feet AGL. So, just like airlines turn off the seatbelt signs once we pass 10,000 feet, you too can just let your passengers know when it's okay to chat and when talking needs to be kept to a minimum. All right, finally, why? Why is, do you have any questions, right? Why? Why is this? Why is that? Okay? We want to make sure our passengers have understood everything we just told them and that they don't have any other questions. All right, so how does all of this differ from a crew safety briefing? Well, there are different things that a crew needs to know and be familiar with than what passengers require. So, first off, in the crew environment, it's important to first identify who will be pilot in command for the flight. This can be expanded on with the allocation of duties such as pilot flying and pilot monitoring. Perhaps one pilot will serve as a safety pilot for the pilot flying and will be responsible for collision avoidance. It's important to brief this and agree as to how the safety pilot will intervene if necessary to maintain that safety of flight. Part of that should include briefing the three-way positive exchange of controls. This is the standard way we always change who the pilot flying is and is important to reinforce. For check ride purposes, the examiner should be briefed on this, and since all pilots should be familiar with the procedure, it's not necessary to explain how the three-way exchange of controls works. It's only necessary to say, basically, anytime we exchange the controls throughout the flight, we will use a three-way positive exchange, okay? Those are the magic words, a three-way positive exchange. It's also important to be in agreement as to who will be responsible for what in the case of an emergency. Perhaps one pilot is far more experienced in the given aircraft, so they will automatically take controls in case of an emergency while the other pilot gives support with radios and checklists. If you are briefing a pilot who is new to the plane you are flying, then you should point out anything specific about that aircraft that may be important for them to know and ask them if they have any questions about anything. Lastly, you probably want to allow each crew member to test their brakes and ensure they are comfortable accessing all the controls they need. Whereas with passengers, we don't want them anywhere near the control panel. Another crew member needs to have appropriate access to the controls and know how to operate them all. Appropriate departure and abort plan briefings should of course always be made with crew members, and be sure that everyone knows what each crew member's responsibilities are throughout both normal and emergency operations or scenarios. So, those are the general differences that we want to be mindful of when we are not only doing our own safety briefings, but also in how we are teaching our students to do their briefings. What do you include with your safety briefings? If there's anything I miss, please be sure to leave a comment below and let me know what you do. I hope this has been helpful for you, and if it has, please share it with anyone else you think would find it helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're here on YouTube, and hit that follow button if you're out there in podcast land. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.